The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of KSMQ Public Service Media Incorporated or its assigns.
Hi, I'm Dan Hoffman, host of Farm Connections. Today we're going to talk about transportation issues and learn about how farm products move from the farm to the consumer. We'll talk roads, rails, and rivers. And we'll also take a look at the state-of-the-art facility of grain handling at Hope, Minnesota. It's all next on Farm Connections.
Welcome to Farm Connections with your host, Dan Hoffman.
Farm Connections on KSMQ is brought to you in part by Primrose Retirement Communities in Austin and Mankato. Primrose, a provider of independent and assisted living, is a proud sponsor of Farm Connections. Primrose, this is living. Task AgriPlan Now is an employee benefit program that enables family farmers to take federal, state, and self-employment tax deductions on health insurance premiums and out-of-pocket expenses. AgriPlan Now is a proud partner of Farm Connections. Will Mahler, the Ag Attorney, has been representing dairy farms in Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin for more than 38 years. Will Mahler, the Ag Attorney's office is in Rochester, and Will, a proud partner of Farm Connections. Thanks, Will Mahler.
Also brought to you in part by Absolute Energy, a locally owned facility producing 115 million gallons of ethanol every year, proudly supporting local economies in Iowa and Minnesota. Absolute Energy, adding value to the neighborhood.
Transportation of ag products has become a concern of many in recent months. I traveled to Lisle, Minnesota to talk to Rick Schwark of Absolute Energy about some of these concerns. Rick, I noticed as I came here today there's a pretty good infrastructure of transportation. What's it take to move product in and out of your plant?
Well, we receive, majority of our corn comes from Minnesota. And we receive on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the big days, we typically receive over 300 semi-loads per day of inbound corn. You can see the bins in the background, one of the smaller bins. The two smaller bins are 500,000 bushels each, and the back bin holds just under 1.2 million bushels. To give you some idea, we go through that much corn in about 20 days.
And how does the corn come into your plant?
Mostly, almost exclusively by truck from local farmers. We actually buy over 90% of our corn comes straight off the farm from the farmer.
Once the product is made, ethanol and DDGs, how does it move out of the plant?
It mostly goes out by rail. Most of our markets for our ethanol, we send it to Albany, New York, Seawarren, New Jersey, Atlanta, Georgia. We're primarily serving the East Coast with our ethanol. And same then with our distillers grains. We load that by rail. They go to Chicago. They're loaded into containers from China. The container loaded with goods for Walmart, Costco, or whatever. We load those with distillers grains and send them back to China as a backhaul.
That's probably helping the freight for both ways, in and out.
Yes, it does.
If it doesn't go back empty, right?
That's right. And it's good for the balance of trade because the goods we bought from China, we're sending back and receiving income back from the distillers grains. It helps with our balance of trade and the value of the dollar.
Are there any bottlenecks to your products in and out?
We have real rail logistics issues in this country. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. It will be interesting to see how we can move this year's coming crop. One of the largest crops this country has ever grown. We've never had to move this type of crop in today's congested rail market. You know, in 2009, there were about 11,000 cars of oil that moved on our rail system. Last year, it was 408,000 cars of oil. So, you know, it's really becoming congested.
Why that tremendous growth on the oil?
Well, it's a good thing for our domestic economy because we're replacing, foreign oil with locally grown oil. But we have some growing pains. That oil's coming from the Bakkens, providing domestic jobs and things. That's a good thing. But we have some growing pains, and we have to, figure out who gets to prioritize some shipments on the rail.
Well, we're also seeing some problems and issues on our lock and dam system, especially on the Mississippi River. Water volumes, sediments, some other things. Any thoughts there?
Well, that's an important commerce highway. And as a nation, we need to pay more attention to the infrastructure of all types, with rail, the lock and dam systems, our roads and bridges. We need to take care of the investments that have already been made.
And listening to you, Rick, it also sounds like if you're drawing from a 50-mile area roughly for corn product, Isn't that helping our infrastructure by not having to ship the corn many, many, many miles away? You're shipping a product that's been refined, correct?
Yes. We add value, and so it does take, instead of shipping all that corn by rail, it does reduce the total volume because it's concentrated, and what we do send out is a processed good. So that's a correct statement, yes.
Recently I was at a meeting of government officials talking about infrastructure and roads, and it seems like they're wanting to do something, but there's challenges they have too. What do we need to do to include our government officials in that conversation?
Well, I think our rural legislators are doing a good job of trying to educate their urban counterparts. But agriculture really needs to stand together, all types of agriculture, because as more generations get further and further removed from the farm, and that's why this program is so important to help educate all citizens about the importance of agriculture. But they lose touch with the farm, and they lose touch with rural needs, and it's important to educate and inform.
Thanks for all the work you do. We just heard from Rick Schwark from Absolute Energy about some transportation issues and how it's affecting agriculture, farmers, and industry. So with us today is Bob Zelenka. Bob, can you tell us about your trade organization?
Minnesota Grain and Feed Association has been around for 108 years, representing the interests of grain elevators and feed mills here in the state. I've got 600 grain elevators in the state. 150 of those are use rail, and of that, 50 of them are the larger unit train loading facilities. So a real variety of facilities statewide. And we provide basically information, education, and representation for the members.
Well, you've heard a little bit about transportation issues in agriculture. How does that affect the people you work with?
Well, transportation obviously is a big issue for us, so truck, rail, as well as on the water. Basically the market for farmers to bring their grain in, and so our role is to store, dry, handle, and move it into the marketplace. So transportation is a key element of what we do.
And you mentioned railroad issues?
Yeah.
Or problems?
Oh yeah.
Can you expand on that some?
Well, we had particularly elevators are located on the Burlington Northern Santa Fe and the Canadian Pacific Railroad, both of which are hauling oil out of the Bakken Range in North Dakota. We had a lot of service delays with our ability to be able to move grain in a timely fashion, and we just weren't getting the service. We had members that were weeks, in some cases months behind on getting cars delivered to their elevator to take it into the marketplace. So in the meantime, the elevators are getting discounted on their contracts to deliver in a timely fashion to the end users, to put it on a vessel, that type of thing, as well as we had borrowed money to buy grain. But if we can't sell it, we're sitting on interest, grows on the borrowed money. We had storage problems. We had to put grain on the ground temporarily, as well as the cost of freight just skyrocketed. Whether it's supply and demand, I don't know, but it certainly is a big part of the problem, and obviously that impacted the basis, what the farmers get paid, because a big part of the basis in those areas that were impacted severely, again, BNSF and CP shippers, obviously impacted that bottom line for those producers, what they ended up getting paid.
And by basis, you mean the difference between the local price and the Chicago price?
Correct, right. And, the difference being, a lot of factors, but in this case, this last winter, transportation was the biggest factor why there was such a wide basis in a lot of those areas, unfortunately.
Bob, you mentioned competition in the rail industry as being a bit of a challenge for getting ag products. What do you mean? Can you be more specific about that competition?
Well, I think the problem has been congestion on the system is the big problem, but access to rail cars, grain hopper cars is a problem. When you see the priority, it seemed like a priority, maybe it wasn't a priority, but you see oil trains moving on a regular basis in tankers, yet we're sitting there weeks and maybe months behind on getting our hopper cars delivered so we can move grain out of our facilities. Just kind of added insult to injury. But more importantly, what the railroads have done, fortunately, is they're adding additional crews, they're doing some double tracking, they are trying to reallocate resources and assets up to the upper Midwest to help address this problem that we've had since was winter into spring. Actually, to this day, we still have some cars that are still late on being delivered from orders from last winter yet.
So why should a consumer of food or ag products in Minnesota really care about transportation costs and issues?
Well, I mean, it ultimately impacts what you end up paying in the marketplace for your food. Transportation is a big part of, and is going to be a bigger part of the cost of getting goods from the farm through the elevator into the export channels or into the domestic marketplace. So as those costs go up, I think, relatively speaking, the other costs seem to go up as well.
What can we do about this railroad issue and other transportation issues?
Well, we've had a lot of meetings. The Surface Transportation Board, which regulates the railroads, has been very involved. They had a couple of field hearings with their staff. They've had and 2 hearings with commissioners. One actually was up here in Fargo, just early September. They're trying to analyze the problems, see what the problems were, see what they could do as an agency. They did actually step forward and required the railroads, BNSF and CP, previously, to provide service metrics. That is, information on a weekly basis on what their turnaround time is, how many cars are on the system, those kind of things. So you have more transparency and better communication, because that was a big problem we had this last winter into the spring, is understanding the process. What's going on, what the problem is, what our expectations can be for when a train will show up so we can load that train. You're trying to line up your crews and the train doesn't show up. I mean, it makes a lot of problems. Most recently, the STB, in fact, just a few days ago, came out with another order requiring all Class 1 railroads to provide weekly updates to the STB on those items, and even some additional items such as dwell times at origin. So, because that's really irritating for an elevator. When you load a train, you have to load it in 15 hours or you get sort of penalized. Yet you load it, it sits there for a week before the railroad comes to pick it up. And so they're looking at those kind of items, as well as checking into how things are working through Chicago, because Chicago is a real choke point for a lot of railroads that come into Chicago and they're trying to get out of Chicago. It has been a real problem, was a problem this last winter that led to some of the delays that we encountered last year.
Well, you mentioned water transportation of ag products. Tell us about the locks and dams and the other systems that move our grain products over water.
Well, that's another option for us, is versus North Dakota, which is more landlocked and dependent on 2 railroads. We at least have the river as an option, and it is a good option for us. However, we have seen the price of freight go up on the river as well. I suppose that's a supply-demand thing, or where rail freight's been going up, but they seem to be going up as well. And there's capacity issues on the water as well. We're close to capacity in terms of what we can move on the water. But yes, you mentioned the locks and dams, that we've been working for years trying to get money to upgrade the locks and dams. And finally, this summer, they finally passed some legislation that's going to allocate resources to upgrade the locks and dams to make that system a lot more efficient. But some of those projects are 30, 40 years down the road, unfortunately, on the work schedule. So it's going to take some time, but it is and has been and probably continues to be probably the cheapest way to move grain out of the upper Midwest is by barge down to New Orleans.
How do roads fit into the transportation equation for ag products?
Well, obviously that's a key factor for us, whether it's moving grain into the 28, 21 ethanol plants, whether it's moving it to a soybean processing plant, or more importantly, farmers bringing it to the elevator. What we're seeing in the evolution of agriculture is more producers have semis, and so we're having to handle large volumes to try to move it as quickly as possible, dealing with a lot of transportation. But a lot of issues are surrounding truck transportation, truck weights. There's been a move to try to improve and increase truck weights, adding another 6th or 7th axle, which actually does less damage to the roads than the current configuration. So there's a lot of moves afoot to try to make that more efficient. But truck is always going to be a key element to get at least to the elevator or to the processing facility. You've got it, at least for that short haul anyway, you need trucks, and it's, again, something we are very involved with over the years.
Bob, thank you so much for joining us.
Appreciate the time. Thank you very much.
Farm Connections crew traveled to Hope, Minnesota and the Crystal Valley Co-op. With me today is Jeff Spence.
Nice to meet you, Dan.
Well, thanks for joining us, Jeff. Got a really great state-of-the-art facility behind us. Tell us about it.
Well, we started building this in, April of 2013. Then in May we had a big snowstorm, so it really put us back. But we finally got it finished here. We had our grand opening on September 10th, and we started receiving grain now. We have 3.8 million bushels of upright storage. We have 2.8 million bushel temporary pile. We have automated scale. We have 3 dump pits, 20,000 each. We have a train load-out system. We can load out 80,000 bushels an hour, 8,200 feet of loop track to allow the whole train, 110-car shuttle to come in at one time. We'll load it in about 6 to 7 hours, and out it'll go to domestic or export destinations.
Can you tell me again how many bushels per hour you said?
80,000 bushels an hour is our dump speed as far as loading trains. Receiving grain, we can do 60,000 bushels an hour.
I thought you said 80,000. That's
Yep.
like 80 semis.
An hour, yes.
Fantastic. Why was it built here?
One thing you need is a good road system to get to your elevator, and the Highway 35W is only a mile from here, so that was an important factor. Another thing we needed was enough land to build this, and the loop track takes well over 160 acres, so it's not just every place you can do it.
It sounds like the transportation piece is very, very important to farmers and agriculture. Can you expand on that?
Well, to me, it's one of the most important parts. You have to be able to get rid of the product you grow, and you have to be able to get rid of it at a market that can pay you whatever the best market is. And so here we can load trains, 110-car trains, and go to California, Idaho, Mexico, the Gulf, the PNW, wherever the best market is. And if that isn't the market, if it's local, we can load trucks out and take our ethanol plants, feed mills, soybean processors, that kind of thing.
So would you describe your business as a collection and value added for the farmer?
Yes, only we're not the end user, but we are the way to get to the end users that you can't get to by truck. For instance, the big market for us, one of them is the dairy market in California. We'll ship a lot of corn trains there. PNW export market for soybeans, we'll ship trains of beans there. Mexico is a really big market for us now, both corn and soybeans, so we'll have trains going down there also.
So you're gathering or collecting corn from about what kind of, and soybeans, from what kind of radius?
Well, in a typical year, we'll pull 25 to 30 miles. Now, there's times when the market could be really tight as far as maybe Nebraska's out of corn. They have to come to us for trains, and we could pull grain as far as 60 miles away.
And so is part of your job to seek out over all the United States and even foreign markets to add value to the farmer's crop?
Right, we're constantly looking for where the best market is for our trains, whether it be corn or soybeans, and whether that be domestic or export.
And how does the farmer find out about your bid or your pricing?
We put our bids on our webpage, we email them out every day, we text them out every day, and of course there's a lot of phone calls just asking, what's your bid, right?
And what is that website?
www.crystalvalley.coop is our, you go there and you just find our bids, and it's pretty simple. You can pick whichever location. We have 6 different grain locations. So we also have a shuttle loader in Medelia, so that's about 67 miles from here, or excuse me, 77 miles from here.
Well, agriculture's changed, grown, and used technology more and more every year. Why is this important today to have a structure and a facility like this?
Speed. You know, the farmer wants to be able to harvest and get his trucks unloaded. It doesn't work for him to have his combine sit out in the field. So we built this place for receiving speed and load-out speed. 60,000 bushels an hour dumping speed is as good as any elevator I think you'll find in the country. You know, and then be able to load the trains fast, be able to do back-to-back trains if that's necessary.
Chef, can you walk us through how the grain and the trucks move through your system?
Sure. At the driveway, when they come in, we have a split driveway so we don't have trucks crossing. They come on in, they come down and go through our inbound scale, which is automated. They all have a little tag in their truck, and it tells the person running the scale who they are, their truck numbers. It gets weighed by the computer. We probe the trucks, grade the grain, and then they come around, they choose one of the 3 different dump pits. We'll send them to one of those 3 dump pits. And if they happen to go to the wrong dump pit, there actually be an alarm go off so we don't dump beans in the corn pit or wet corn in the dry corn pit. And it takes them about 35, 45 seconds to get out of there, and then they go to the outbound scale, and the computer weighs them, prints them a ticket, takes about 30 seconds, and out they go.
And once that grain is dumped, what happens next?
Well, it goes into one of our many different bins, depending on the grade and the quality, the moisture, whether we have to dry it. And then from that point, when we get a train in, then we load the train, pulling out of those different bins depending on what we need to do to make grade.
And when you're pulling that sample, you're looking for foreign material, you're looking for test weight, you're looking for moisture.
Right, we need to ship number 2 yellow corn trains, and so we'll screen the corn if we need to take some FM out of it. Of course, we've dried it already, so it's dry enough to make grade. Test weight, of course, we can't do anything about that. It's got to have good enough test weight. This year, test weight is going to be a little borderline, probably going to be more like 55 pounds. Some years we get 58 pounds, but in 2009 it was only 53. So it should be much better than that.
Jeff, how does a train or the train company know to show up?
Well, we'll sell the corner beans to many different companies, and when we sell to them, we sell them for a certain shipment period. And then we agree on when we will take that train and load it. And of course, then the next big problem is, will the train get here on time? Recently, that's been a problem. Then the train will come in. Our trains come from the south on the main line here, and there's a power switch out there. They open from Omaha, and the train comes in at 10 to 20 miles an hour. They'll come around, they'll close that switch so the main line's open again. We have 15 hours to load it, but it only takes about 7. And once we're done loading it, we call the UP and we tell them it's released, and they send their crew back and take it away.
Do you have a backup when the train is late, or if they don't show up at all, can you truck it?
Well, we can truck it, but it takes 440 semis worth of corn for one train. So if we have to truck that out, it takes a lot longer than loading a train.
And you also have some flat storage.
Right, we have a temporary piling system that will hold 2.8 million bushels. It's 300 by 500 feet long with 4-foot sidewalls, and we can fill that at 20,000 bushels an hour. And then there's an air system in there. We will tarp it, and that air will hold the tarp on until we're ready to empty it.
Jeff, what makes this a state-of-the-art grain handling facility?
Well, the automation gives us the speed both at receiving and at the loadout. It's all a mouse, you point and click, and it sends the grain where you want it to go. In the old days, we had to crank the distributors and hit the button and do all that stuff. Everything's run by a computer now. And the speed to load 80,000 bushels an hour going out is just tremendous.
Those are some big numbers, and I'm guessing that maybe a few generations ago we didn't need this size and scale?
Yeah, well, when I started in the business, if you could receive grain at about 5,000 bushels an hour, you were pretty fast. Now we're receiving at 60,000 bushels an hour, so a big difference.
So why do farmers and agriculture need more efficiency and larger capacities at this time?
Well, the size of the farm has grown tremendously. When I was a kid, my dad farmed 160 acres, and that was a bunch. Now 1,500, 2,000 acres, and there's some farmers farming 5,000, even 10,000 acres. So they have to have the speed to be able to get out there and get that crop in a timely fashion before we get bad weather, that kind of thing. And so to be able to deliver to an elevator that could only take beans or corn at 5,000 bushels an hour, you'd have a line from here out to the interstate. So that's why we built 60,000 bushel an hour worth of speed for dumping.
And each of those farmers produces more per acre than he used to also.
Right. Years ago, farmers would shoot for 125, 150 bushel an acre. Now they're shooting for 180, 200, or even more. Beans, used to be 30, 40 bushel. Now it's 50, 60 bushel an acre.
And finally, why should the consumer or the person buying food be happy that you're efficient and using our transportation system well?
Well, it makes their end product cheaper when they go to the grocery store, because the higher cost there is to the person producing food for the grocery store, that gets passed on too. So the more efficient the whole system can be, whether it's the farmer, whether it's the co-op shipping the grain to the end users, or the end users themselves, the cheaper it keeps our food supply here in America.
And we appreciate that. Keep up the good work.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for joining us as we talked about transportation issues in agriculture. I'm your host, Dan Hoffman. Thanks for joining us on Farm Connections.